What's your childhood mystery that you finally solved years later? The weird smell that I referred to as a stinky cheese smell were probably a symptom of seizures. I would happen maybe twice a year. It's not really like cheese. It's like a smell that isn't a smell. I don't know how to even describe it. It was so minor parents disregarded it. I can remember it starting in 2nd grade. I suddenly started having it a lot more as an adult when I hit 28 and got diagnosed 2 years later after symptoms became way more extreme. Makes so much sense now. My dad used to occasionally burst out with this one line of a song. Barnacle Bill the Sailor. Only ever that line. When I was 6 or so I asked him why and he said it was an old drinking song that was absolutely filthy and I was too young to hear the rest of it. This continued once or twice a year until I was 18. I told him I was an adult now and he could tell me the rest of the song. I distinctly remember him looking up from the newspaper, sighing and folding it, then going, "The truth is I can never remember the rest of the song." And then went right back to reading the newspaper. Your dad wasn't wrong about it being a filthy song. The entire time I lived in my childhood home, my mom hid my Christmas presents in her secret hiding place. She made it sound mystical and mysterious a few months ago, a while after I moved out. She finally told me what the secret hiding place actually was. The Christmas tree box in a cabinet in the garage. She would replace the Christmas tree with my presents when she put the tree up. I remember being about 8. And in the car with my dad. I was in the front seat and we were driving somewhere. And this song came on the radio. He cranked it and said something about it being the best guitar playing ever. He really jammed out. Which was really uncharacteristic because he was usually so stoic. It was the only time I heard the song. And he died before I could ever ask him what song it was. When I asked around, no one knew WTF I was talking about or what song I was thinking of. So I had this melody in my head for years. But how do you look up a song that has no lyrics? So for years and years, this song stayed on the back burner in my brain. I was afraid to forget it. Somehow this story pops up when I'm like 26 or so, chatting with my husband, and we searched YouTube for best guitar songs. After about 15 minutes, we find it. Cliffs of Dover was the song that I'd burned into my brain on repeat for 16 years. Now I jam out to it with my kids. Undefined. My dad is a professional guitarist and he'd always play this song. Whenever he'd practice with his amp he'd play this song. Which was basically every day growing up. LOL, it was his theme. I didn't realize he didn't write it until I randomly heard it on the radio at work when I was in my early 20s. When I was younger, like 4 or 5, my family had a pet turtle. One day the turtle went missing and my parents told me it climbed the wall in our backyard and went to the creek behind our house. I, being a naive toddler child, did not question this logic. Fast forward to when I was 17 and driving with my mom in the car. We saw a tortoise crossing the street and I was suddenly thrown back to my memory of us having a pet turtle. I pulled over to save the tortoise and was all OMG mom, turtles can't climb walls. What happened to our turtle? Came to find out it had burrowed a hole in our lawn and my dad didn't notice it until after he ran it over with a lawnmower. Obviously it was easier to pick up the pieces and tell your kid it climbed the wall than admit you murdered it with a lawnmower. TLDR. Parents lied to me about a pet going missing and I found out it was brutally murdered on accident by my father. I'm sorry about your pet. But for what it's worth, some turtles are pretty decent climbers as well as diggers when they put their minds to getting out of somewhere. When I was in elementary school, I always wondered what the teacher's staff room was like. It seemed so mysterious, and I remember trying to get a peek anytime I walked by and the door would open. Later became a teacher and can fully confirm they're dull. Often toxic spaces full of cranky teachers complaining about students. As a kid, I used to frequently just walk into the teacher's lounge to use their vending machines. It wasn't until years later that I found out that wasn't a perfectly normal thing to do. In hindsight, I guess they all just assumed I was in there on an errand for another teacher. As someone who occasionally microwaved my lunches there, I can confirm that they really just do not give a speep. Growing up, I always insisted I liked the mashed potatoes at my grandma's house better than the ones my mom made at home. My grandma once told me it's because she uses a special recipe. I found out last year that my mom hand mashes her potatoes. My grandma just gets the Betty Crocker box speep. Her special recipe, I was gonna get what she dies, is Betty Beeping Crocker. Reverse of this. As a kid, my dad would call me from the other side of the house to bring him something to drink from the kitchen. He always drank from a straw, and about first grade, I started getting annoyed at this, so I started poking a tiny hole in his straw as my own little vengeance. I didn't come clean about this until I was like 22 years old. The look on his face was priceless. It's like he instantly snapped back to then and knew exactly what I was talking about and just said, "Son of a. You did. Didn't you?" He just thought we bought cheap straws. I have a reverse one also. Mum used to make those Betty Crocker cakes and I loved eating the batter. I would eat so much of it there would barely be any cake left. She was completely perplexed. Finally she writes a long angry email to Betty Crocker about what a farce their cake mix is because it barely makes a cake big enough to eat. They apologized profusely and sent a bunch of free cake mix. I told her in my late 20s. The look on her face. Similar story. I loved cookie dough. And we always had the tubs in the fridge. When I was fairly little I kept a butter knife and spoon hidden in my room for cookie dough raids. I would sneak into the kitchen at like 4 a.m. Slide the butter knife around the fridge magnet so it didn't make the loud pop sound when you opened it. And eat cookie dough while watching cartoons on mute. My mom never understood why the cookie dough produced so few cookies. Edit to add. That butter knife served me well. Also allowed me to unwrap one end of a Christmas present without hurting the tape so I could read the end of the box and see what the present was. Not the biggest mystery, but one day my friend was over in my house playing video games. My mom called us over to her room to help flip the mattress over. So we did. We then went to another friend's house. My mom calls that friend and says, "There was two $20 bills on top of the dresser. Did you get them?" I said no. I asked my friend. He said no. Like 5 minutes later, my friend says if we want to go to the toy store because he has $40 in two $20 bills. I say yes and we go and he buys me a yo-yo or something. It took me years to finally realize that my friend stole the money. I visited my dad when I was 6 or 7 years old at the place where he worked. Or so I was told. I remember remarking at the time. And people laughed at me. Because I said it looked just like a prison. The people laughing were the guards, and I was indeed visiting my dad at Terminal Island Federal Correctional Institution where he was a federal inmate. I remember having to visit my father in prison. It's weird speep for a young kid. The lie probably did you some favors. I solved a family mystery for my mom. I wasn't allowed to play console video games during the week all the way until I was 18, but some nights I'd really be craving it, so I would noiselessly creep through my house into my basement where I could play video games in peace. But once every 30 times or so one of my parents would need something from the basement and I'd quickly turn off the TV monitor, hide in the guest room and pray they didn't turn on a light or notice the Xbox was on. One night I ducked into the guest room and hid behind the bed. To my horror, my mom followed me into the room and turned on the lights. I was panicking, so when she started digging through the closet with her back to me, I made a run for it. I nearly brushed her shirt, and if she'd seen me I'd probably have given her a heart attack. But I made it and kept going all the way to bed. About 5 years went by and my mom said something like, "You're such a quiet walker," and I told her it was because of my basement trips, thinking I had nothing to lose. My mom's face went kinda solemn, and when I explained, she said, "So there really was someone down there?" And she explained that she remembered that exact night and the feeling that there was a ghost in the room. Over the next couple days she'd stare into space and just say, "I can't believe you were really there." She seemed to get over it, but she probably checks empty rooms closer now. LOL. Of all the ways to traumatize your parents. I had to explain to my mum that my teen sister was not potentially depressed or ill because she started needing a nap like every other day after school and would sleep really deep and only react to the second or third knock. Mum couldn't believe that she may just be diddling herself in her room. That did somewhat traumatize her. Oh God. I distinctly remember having one of the most embarrassing conversations with my mom ever at 13 years old. My mom kept asking why I started always having my door closed at night as a preteen, and would constantly knock to check up on me. Finally she just decided to unlock the door with a key and walked in on little 13-year-old me choking the chicken. She thought I was playing with fire or something else that I shouldn't have been doing for whatever reason. It apparently had never occurred to her that a 13-year-old boy would need some alone time. We were both pretty damn embarrassed. My mom had me when she was older too, like early 40s. She came from a time when that kind of thing was simply not discussed. A key excerpt from the conversation. Mom. But every night? Me. Bright as a tomato. Half yelling in an attempt to end the conversation. Yes. Every night? Sometimes twice? Can we please stop now? Later on we both laughed about it. And I got to explain to her that in middle school it was like walking around with a half-cocked gun all day, LOL. It's funny because she worked as a nurse for years. She had to know what that time was like. Later on we both laughed about it. And I got to explain to her that in middle school it was like walking around with a half-cocked gun all day, LOL. It's funny because she worked as a nurse for years. She had to know what that time was like. You see. I'm 33 now. But my parents are still too embarrassed about sex and anything around it that looking back and laughing about it is still out of the cards. Undefined. Came back from an extended walk to 7K upvotes. WTF. As I've seen a few guys comment along the lines of religion is a curse. Religion isn't really the issue. Never was. They were just brought up in different times. Their parents couldn't talk about it. And they themselves couldn't. Like I said. They never forbade sex at all. We were free to do as we liked. No issues having girls/guys over and sleeping with them. No wait till marriage yada yada, we're German. No one. Not even the Catholics. Preaches that here. They are just unable to talk about sex with their kids, us, and let everything work out without their active input. My father used to take us camping and on hikes and bike rides. He taught us about safety in the woods and on the water and how to navigate using maps. So it wasn't all that strange when he said one day, I was maybe 10, we were doing a game where we'd be blindfolded and taken on a drive. The object of the game was to call out what direction we were turning by feel, and then ultimately after driving about 30 minutes give a guess roughly where we were and which direction home was in. He was impressed how well we did. And we took off the blindfolds and went for a hike. I never thought much about it. Years later I realized why we played the game. My dad was in criminal psychology. Especially sex offenders. He was kidnap-proofing us, but in a light-hearted way, so there was no fear or trauma. It's awesome that your dad instilled a sense of direction in you. That said, if I saw someone roll up in a car full of blindfolded kids that they then led into the woods, I'd be pretty concerned that I was witnessing a real life "you think you're scared, I'm the one who has to walk out of here alone" moment.